Hi there. You're now listening to the fifth installment of Felix firing off from afar for the flyover. And Felix has been asked to this time speak to 1975 Women's Prison Revolt. And this is documented in the book Dixie Be Damned 300 Years of Insurrection in the American South, edited by Neil Shirley and Sarah Lee Stafford. Specifically in the chapter We Asked for Life on the 1975 Revolt at the North Carolina Correctional Center for Women. And so there are a couple important historical points and analyses offered by the authors that I think are worth discussing. And so as they point out, in the 1960s and 1970s, there was increasing criminalization of social movement activities and of protest and rebellion, what with the urban uprisings and the sit-down strikes and the student revolts and what have you. And one of the consequences of this was it delivered tactical thinking rebels to the prison population. And so, in some sense, it was a boon for organizing on the inside. And the authors in this chapter give lots and lots of background history, much of it very tangential. It kind of would have been nice if they cut to the point about the North Carolina Correctional Center for Women Rebellion a little quicker, because elaboration of a specific concrete example can be much more informative and useful. But now Felix, too, is guilty of digressing. So, back to the chapter. As the authors explain, women in the North Carolina Correctional Center for Women, or NCCCW, rebelled in June 1975 in response to a bevy of issues, including medical treatment, lack thereof, and forced labor in the laundry facilities in the prison, where they did the laundry for the entire state of North Carolina prison system, which is insane. And so the rebellion was also about much more than that, too. As one participant, Marjorie Marsh, said in response to the paltry conciliatory offerings of the prison administration in the wake of the revolt, "We did not ask for a softer bed, a nightstand, a locker, etc. We asked for life." And I'll return to the idea of the locus of revolt in a minute. Now, the NCCCW rebellion consisted of, among other events, a yard occupation, and then some assembly-style decision-making at the yard, and then a camp-out there, which is reminiscent more recently of something like Occupy Wall Street. But the women did not sleep for long. They were not permitted that luxury. Soon, early in the morning, the guards had started charging women, beating them. Prisoners fought back with what they could, janitorial weaponry, namely mops, brooms, and the like. And then the occupation resumed. There were some pseudo-negotiations with the administration, and eventually agreed to end the laundry within 90 days. But next morning, the women refused to return to the normal labor routines in the laundry room, that being one of the primary focus points of the rebellion to begin with. And so the negotiations, as the authors of the chapter point out, and I think this is an important point, they ended up playing very much into the administration's hand. So reform activists on the outside, affiliated with the organization Action for Forgotten Women, which is a somewhat militant but ultimately reformist and institutionally oriented group, well, they were given and assumed a mediating role. The negotiations gave this appearance of compromise and sincerity, and it gave the administration also time to move guards into the area to quell the rebellion. And the author suggests the role of the reform activists in the chicanery of negotiations might have militated against a full-blown takeover of the prison. Of course, a full takeover is not something that is easy to do, probably even harder to accomplish more or less spontaneously, which is how the June 1975 NCCCW rebellion has been described. Or, the purported negotiations also could have thwarted a more militant and organized resistance movement inside and out, perhaps. So nevertheless, the AFW, American Action for Forgotten Women, appears to have played into the power structure's containment strategy. This is despite the fact the relations remain strong between the organization and prisoners, and that the organization, the AFW, like many progressive and less revolutionary but still social justice oriented organizations, have and continue to show solidarity with those on the inside, and continue to participate in struggles in important ways. But a key point to consider is the extent to which and in what contexts attempts at solidarity actually amount to abetting the enemy. That is, to what extent the reform-minded partial protagonists exercise agency on behalf of or in ways that inadvertently benefit in part the existing power structure or the reorganization of power that maintains modes of oppression reformers and revolutionaries alike are seeking to end. So something to consider. And it's ironic, too, because the reform activists were labeled later outside agitators with a communist element. And those are real tired old tropes, as I'm sure you know. Outside agitators has been used to vilify anarchist involvement in many resistance movements before and after 1975. Recently been used to denigrate those showing solidarity with the Black Lives Matter protesters on the streets of Ferguson and St. Louis. And, the communist boogeyman is always a convenient ideological appellation that mobilizes fear and anxiety and channels anger away from interrogating fundamental abominations within the existing system, within capitalism, and toward an evil enemy that's supposedly intent on destroying all that is right and good. That's the function of that ideological moniker, more or less. And so returning to the NCCCW rebellion and the role of the AFW, once reform activists had been used by the administration to provide a veneer of negotiations, they were later discarded and demonized, enabling the oppressive power structure to better protect itself and sustain its oppressive operations through the vilification of even moderate reform movements, or those who are engaged in moderate movements for reform, like the AFW was. And so, a couple points here. First, it underscores that prison struggles are always on some level about more than specific grievances or demands, as crucial as those often are. So, more fundamentally, the struggles emerge as a result of and express the struggle of the oppressed below against the authority from the oppressive apparatus above. And that doesn't mean that rebels in prison should eschew articulating grievances or even making demands, as the authors point out. While demand making is, for many good reasons, not in vogue in many non-prison organizing efforts today, as focus instead shifts, rightfully, in my view, to taking affairs into our own hands without asking for help and legitimizing oppressive hierarchies. But in the prison context, there are important differences to consider and demands often to be made. But refusing to dialogue with the state on its terms, and instead making disobedience and collective doing otherwise the new order of the day, appears likely to have a better impact and could better achieve the objectives that would otherwise be sought and denied through attempts at negotiations. So again, that I'm alluding to the tension with working with organizations that are reform-minded, even those who sincerely are interested in showing solidarity with the struggle. So only lasting changes after the rebellion, they were largely cosmetic, except the laundry facilities were shut down. Not because negotiations and dialogue had succeeded, they were largely a farce, as I mentioned before, but the administration understood clearly that keeping the abhorrent and vehemently hated laundry services going in the prison would increase the likelihood of future rebellions, or could. In gross capitalistic terms, that to an extent are actually apt here, the rebellion increased the cost of doing business. And so management were forced to make adjustments, which in this case was at least something that benefited those on the inside. There was something that was concretely accomplished. There were other things too, and I'll get to those. But I wanted to share with listeners at this juncture a really distressing fact. So Felix's sister is now caged in the Logan Correctional Center, prison for women in Lincoln, Illinois. And the address for writing to her, if you're interested in doing that, should be available at the Flyover Info Shop. She and other inmates really appreciate letters. This is true for comrades in jail as well. She had spent some time in Bond County Jail in Greenville, Illinois. I had sent her the lyrics to Immortal Technique's song Parole, and she and other folks there really appreciate the art and literature and that sort of thing. So if you'd like to share and send some of that to her and others behind bars, stop by the Flyover Info Shop at 214 North Washington Street in Carbondale, Illinois, or you can write to the shop, mail it to that address with Attention Prisoner Solidarity Working Group, the address line, or you can email InfoShop folks at info@flyoverinfoshop.org. Now, as for the letter writing, I think it's really key because it helps forge connections that are absolutely essential it's impossible to show solidarity with those on the inside and work to organize against their being an inside without establishing meaningful relations with those currently incarcerated, those who can speak to issues directly. This does not always necessarily take the form of overt solidarity with resistance if no organized resistance is actually taking place at that moment, although almost always there are hidden transcripts hidden transcripts of resistance, to borrow a phrase coined by James C. Scott. Those are almost always at work, especially within oppressive sites like prisons, wherein authority is wholly illegitimate. But writing to prisoners is partly about recognition that there are human beings inside those hellholes. Yes, we want more than to just make their lives comfortable in prison. Many of us want to abolish prison as we know it, but it's not insufficiently radical to want to help them, those who are subjected to the most oppressive conditions, to hold on to their humanity and struggle against that dehumanization under those deplorable conditions. And I'd add that it isn't just or even primarily horrid and intolerable conditions that give rise to revolt. So I'm returning to what I had promised to return to before. So solidarity and the cultivation of meaningful social relations, politicized bonds of love and trust, plus various modes of critical pedagogy and becoming conscious of how individually experienced oppressions overlap and speak to the underlying structures that oppress. When those things all develop, it's far easier to first identify the structural sources of injustice, and that is the places where it makes the most strategic sense to strike and resist within institutions, and then to consider what props up and allows the systematic oppression to continue, and then use the solidarity and communalist sensibilities already forged to wage struggles against those focal points, which in turn, of course, can foster even stronger forms of solidarity and even more revolutionary love, which is, to an important extent, transformative in and of itself. And so these actions are not always or necessarily revolutionary, but they are important. They demonstrate an important exercise of our revolutionary muscles and affects. And so that's all Felix has for you now, folks. You've been listening to the 5th installment of Felix Firing Off from Afar for the Flyover. Tune in next time for what Felix has to say in his ongoing audio series. In the meantime, you can dig this song by Atmosphere. It's titled Guarantees.
These warehouse wages till the end's introduction. Man, I should've schooled it up when I was younger. Should've stuck the plan. Always had the dreams of being more self-assertive. And my kid's a teenager, now he needs the health insurance. So break my body, break my soul down. Just another zombie walking blindly through your ghost town. Pull up to the bar, to politic and tap the power. Ain't nobody really all that jolly at your happy hour. I don't wanna go home yet, so I'ma talk to my cigarette and that television set. It doesn't matter what brand the station, anything to take away from the current situation. No overtime pay, no holiday, months behind on everything but the lottery. Waits around the corner, guaranteeing that my car dies. Wifey having trouble trying to juggle both the part-times. My cup ain't close to filled up, we trying to build up so we can have enough. When I finally get the color, won't be nothing left to paint on. A friend of mine tried to kill himself to the same song. half as mad at making magic out of can. Gets my tax bracket status, got a question in my manhood. My shorty got caught smoking weed at a concert, and if I smack him, everybody treats me like a monster. My neighbors ain't doing much better, and we make a competition instead of sticking together. Can't save no nest egg. In fact, this nest is rented. In fact, that rent is late. Wait, the money ain't here, the raise ain't coming. Just me and my son and that crazy woman and those bartenders. This whole fucking country got everybody swallowing that lunch meat. Maybe we can speed up the process. Kill me in my 30s in the name of progress. Put me in the dirt and then change the topic. Sometimes seems like the only way to stop it. Contemplate my departure date. Doesn't take a lot to get a lot of us to talk this way. Take a shot at me, that's all I'm obligated for. Apparently my only guarantee is a walk away. The only guarantee in life is a life worth dying for. Cause death don't wait for no one. Sitting on your front door. The only guarantee in life is a life worth dying for.